Part 50. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 492. Exchange only one kind? Whether it's the Apocalypse tank or the Kirov airship, giving any one to the Allies will greatly increase their strength. This is tantamount to raising a tiger to make trouble. I don't agree. That's right, and if any of these two arms are exchanged for the Allies, do they deserve to have them? As soon as Wang Ling finished speaking, some radical generals retorted. They regarded their own great weapons as treasures and would not let go of them easily. However, a general responded immediately, whether the Allies are worthy or not, I don't care for the moment, but we are indeed going to join forces with the Allies now. And this is the premise for our alliance. No matter how unhappy we are with them, it is undeniable that we do need some of their technology. The Allies are not fools. They can't let us do it with nothing. So it is necessary to come up with something tough. Not to mention that it is not given to them for free, they also need to come up with military technology of equal value in exchange. Following these two generals, Wang Ling also struck while the iron was hot and said with a smile, "At this time, I really admire the coach for blocking the possibility of the Allied forces trapping us in advance. Although I have almost checked all the Allied forces' military technology, we can take this opportunity to select some useless troops, but we still have further power to select. If we are not satisfied with the technology of the troops they provide, we can shoot them to death at any time. Based on this, and with the strength of the generals present, I think, it should be enough to cause the Allies to bleed once, right?" This. Wang Ling wore this last high hat at the right time. Those radical generals had been admonished for so long. In fact, they were already a little moved. It was just a matter of face and they refused to let go. But with Wang Ling's final blow, the group of radical generals finally found the platform and descended down the slope. As a result, many generals remained silent. Some generals who were still struggling were speechless for a long time. Seeing that no one else had the intention to refute, they simply sighed and acquiesced. At this time, PoortoRich looked around at the group of people and summed up, "It seems that the result has been achieved. Just follow what Wang Ling said and exchange one of them." However, Wang Ling, Kirov airship and Tiankai, have you ever thought about which type of tank you want to exchange for? This was a major issue, and Wang Ling had to be cautious. "General, I have indeed thought about this, but after all, the matter is so important that I dare not make an arbitrary decision myself, so I have to ask the generals to help me imagine. If we have made adequate defense preparations, 50 Apocalypse tanks of different levels will attack our base together, and 50 Kirov airships will bombard our base. Which situation will cause greater damage to us? Threaten. Imagine it." It's interesting. Upon hearing this, many generals glanced at each other with some interest. When it comes to imagination, this requires no foreshadowing or preparation at all. All scenes can be generated in the mind almost instantly. After listening to Wang Ling's suggestion, the generals on the scene almost immediately staged two unique guards in their minds. War. In these two defensive battles, just as Wang Ling said, the defender is the coalition base and is ready for a full-scale battle, while the other side is the Allies, who have exchanged coalition technology and dispatched 50 Apocalypse vehicles alone. Tanks or 50 Kirov airships came to attack. Wang Ling also reimagined it. In his mind, the first battle about the Apocalypse tanks could be said to be very tragic. Under the impact of 50 Allied Apocalypse tanks, a large number of mobilization troops were crushed. However, a large number of tanks were also dispatched to defend the base. At the same time, in conjunction with sentry guns and magnetic storm coils, the firepower was fully activated. The entire base was drowned by the sound of gunfire, and the combat effectiveness of both sides continued to decrease. In his imagination, Wang Ling couldn't help but shudder, because the battle he imagined would not be an advantage for the coalition base at all. the base's defense might be overwhelmed, and the entire base would be massively damaged. If the command is not caught up in time or properly, the base will be at risk of destruction. This imaginary first battle is too dangerous. If the Allies have the Apocalypse tank, it will be too much of a threat to the Allies. But looking back at the second imagined battle, the situation seemed to be reversed. The Kirov airship is very powerful and a great threat, but its speed is too slow. The coalition base used dozens of anti-aircraft crawlers to leave the base in advance, attacked the Kirov airship midway, and fought and retreated. During this period, the Kirov airship, the airships were unable to fight back, but they continued to be shot down. When arriving at the coalition base, the number will be reduced by at least half. If the base is equipped with a large number of anti-aircraft guns, these Kirov airships may not be able to make any achievements. Of course, this is just an imaginary battle. In reality, there may be many variables and contingencies, such as improper command, insufficient air defense, or more, etc., which will affect the battle situation. However, overall, compared to Kirov airships, Apocalypse tanks pose a greater threat to the coalition forces. Thinking of this place again, Wang Ling already had a plan in mind. At this time, many other generals also stopped imagining and came to the conclusion, the Apocalypse tank poses a greater threat to us. Yes, it's the Apocalypse tank. If we have enough anti-aircraft crawlers, the Kirov airship army will not be able to pose much of a threat to us. The conclusions reached by these generals are surprisingly consistent. Of course, there were some generals who kept frowning and could not come to a conclusion at all. Of course, it was also possible that they failed to imagine those battle situations. Good. At this point in the meeting, PoortoRich finally had a direction, so, it's decided that the military technology that our coalition forces want to exchange is this big killer weapon, the Kirov airship. Now that the decision has been made, the meeting has come to an end. Taking advantage of the fact that there is still some time, everyone present took a short rest. When the 2-hour appointment was approaching, they set off collectively to the large conference room on the 3rd floor. I want to see what kind of military technology the Allies will exchange. When they came to the conference room, the Allied forces were already here, but they were not too cold about the arrival of the Allied generals. Almost everyone was staring at the electronic map. During the previous meeting of the coalition forces, the laser UFO of Yuri's troops was flying towards the eastern castle area. During the meeting, the UFO never stopped. After nearly an hour of flight time, it is now close to this area. A region. As the senior generals of the Allied forces, they are not too unfamiliar with this kind of flying saucer. They are well aware of the terror of this type of arms, but now they have to pay attention to it. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 493. Wang Ling, did you arrange this defense? Do you know how difficult it is to deal with the UFOs coming from Yuri's troops this time? Can you stop them with more than 20 anti-aircraft crawler vehicles? The other Allied generals were watching the electronic video, but Agent Tanya was the first to notice Wang Ling and ask. Wang Ling replied with a confident look, "Don't worry, if these laser UFOs keep flying along the established route and are hit by an anti-aircraft crawler vehicle, not even one of them will be spared, they will all be killed. Even if they are by luck, they bypassed those anti-aircraft crawlers and flew across the river." There were several large field groups setting up defenses in the rear. There were also numerous anti-aircraft crawlers and anti-aircraft guns built outside the eastern castle. They were blocked at all levels and they could not overturn. What kind of waves are there? Really? Let's wait and see. Agent Tanya glanced at Wang Ling and ignored him. To be honest, Agent Tanya actually hates Wang Ling's confident look, but who made the arrangements Wang Ling made during the previous defenses to restrain Yuri's weird troops every time. Several times in a row, she had an inexplicable confidence in Wang Ling. It seemed that as long as Wang Ling was not worried, it would be impossible for Yuri's troops to attack. The other allied generals also heard Wang Ling's answer and looked at him in surprise, but no one spoke and just continued to watch the projected electronic video. Taking advantage of this time, the generals of the allied forces, as well as Wang Ling and Yan Tian, also took their seats and watched the electronic video with the allied forces. As they watched, the dozen or so laser UFOs were still flying fast on fixed routes, with no intention of changing their routes. After flying at this speed for a while, they finally collided with the anti-aircraft crawlers that had been waiting by the river, and an anti-aircraft battle broke out. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Swish, swish, swish. Swish, swish, swish. The exploration of the electronic map by Yuri's troops did not reach this area and was intercepted by the coalition and allied forces in advance. Therefore, they did not know that there were anti-aircraft tracked vehicles stationed here. By mental calculation and unintentional, these more than 20 vehicles, the anti-aircraft crawlers, opened fire in unison, and the laser UFOs in the front row were immediately stunned. Their health dropped sharply. Within a short time, 2 of the laser UFOs were shot down, and there was also a large amount of remaining health of the laser UFOs. After suffering such a big loss, the laser UFOs also reacted and collectively began to resist. Laser attacks fell one after another. After a round of focused fire, 2 anti-aircraft tracked vehicles were blown up. But during this period, the army of anti-aircraft crawlers was also firing continuously. The firepower was dense and fierce, and the remaining laser UFOs in the front row were shot down one after another. The air defense battle is still going on. These 20-odd anti-aircraft tracked vehicles are like more than 20 Arhats. They are as motionless as a mountain and just fire into the air non-stop. A large number of artillery shells pour down, and those laser UFOs are also destroyed. Shot down one after another. During this period, the laser UFO was also constantly counter-attacking, and from time to time, anti-aircraft crawler vehicles exploded. At the beginning of the air battle, it did seem a bit stalemate, but it did not last long, and the winner was gradually determined. The number of laser UFOs in the sky became smaller and smaller. Until the last laser UFO was shot down, the anti-aircraft crawler vehicle, only 7 of the Army's vehicles were destroyed, and the advantage was very obvious. When the air battle ended, many generals on the scene finally breathed a sigh of relief. On the Allied side, a general then spoke with some jealousy. Unexpectedly, the flying saucer that troubled us before was actually restrained. The air defense efficiency of the Allied air defense tracked vehicles is really not bad. That's right, don't look at whose arms it is, General Luo smiled broadly. The other coalition generals smiled and said nothing. After General Bob pondered for a while, he took a deep look at Wang Ling and asked, "Wang Ling, from your previous deployment, it seems that you know Yuri's troops very well, and even some of us know him well. You know the types of soldiers you don't know much about, and you can successfully control them every time. I'm curious, how do you know this?" This is an old problem again. When Wang Ling just joined the battlefield and showed his familiarity with the Allied arms, he was already suspected by the Allied forces. It was only through identification by police dogs and subsequent military exploits that the Allied generals were completely dissuaded. Concerns. At this time, under the general trend of the alliance, the Allies finally brought it up again. However, Wang Ling would not reveal his secret, and he didn't even bother to find an excuse. He just said perfunctorily, "General, this is my secret, and I have no contradiction with you. I can only say that Yuri and I have no differences. It doesn't matter, if anything, it's because I want to kill him, that's all." This answer obviously made General Bob very dissatisfied. However, under the protection of many coalition generals, he did not want to embarrass Wang Ling. He just took the opportunity to ask, "Well, I won't pursue this, but Wang Ling, What we know is all secret information, and it will play a vital role in the fight against the Seoul Empire. Since our two armies are going to unite, shouldn't this information be concealed? Shouldn't it be revealed in full? His intention was actually simple to say. He just wanted to share information. However, when he said these words, there was a lot of gunpowder and coercion in his mouth. Some of the coalition generals present were a little displeased. However, Wang Ling didn't care, and smiled and said, "This is natural. I don't need to remind General Bob, I will introduce it to you in detail. However, now is not the time, let's discuss it first, both of us, what kind of military technology should be exchanged. Compared with public information, I care more about this." "Okay, as you wish." Ahem. After stopping General Bob, PoortoRich coughed twice, omitted all preludes, went straight to the topic, and asked, "General Bob, after some discussions, we fully understand the importance of this alliance, so the arms in terms of technology exchange, we also showed enough sincerity and decided to exchange the military technology of the Kirov airship. I wonder what other military technology of equal value can the Allies exchange?" Although the exchange of Kirov airships had long been discussed, after hearing PoortoRich say it, some coalition generals at the scene could not help but feel distressed, as if they were their own treasures and wanted to share them with others. "Oh? Your army is actually willing to exchange the aerial death god's military technology?" Contrary to the Allied forces suddenly became excited when they heard the news. Under their assumptions, the coalition forces could exchange for the Apocalypse tank, which was a matter of consideration for the overall situation. However, they did not expect that the coalition forces would exchange all the technology of this aerial god of death. This generous move really surprised them. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 494. That's natural. In order to fight against the enemy, the coalition forces and the Allied forces have united for the first time. Of course, we can't be petty when it comes to exchanging technology between arms. PoortoRich looked at these Allied generals and raised the corner of his mouth slightly, as if he meant something. Our coalition has shown the greatest degree of sincerity, so I don't know what kind of military technology the Allies can exchange this time. At this point, all the coalition generals were very curious and cheered up to listen to the Allies' reply. Under the gaze of many coalition generals, General Bob smiled cunningly, and then replied, "Since the coalition forces have shown enough sincerity, of course our allies cannot be worse. This joint effort arms technology exchange, our allies are ready to bring out the Phantom tank in exchange." Phantom tank? Is it the kind that can disguise itself as trees to ambush, and is very lethal to both infantry and tanks? Well, the technology of this type of unit is not bad. This type of tank sounds pretty good. After several generals heard this, they whispered a few times, and then a general asked, "Phantom tanks can be exchanged, and then what?" Then, at this point, General Bob smiled playfully, "What else? Everyone, are our allies' Phantom tanks not heavy enough to exchange for the Air Reaper? Are they going to continue to covet the technology of our other arms? Damn it! Is this the only one? Allies, you have gone too far. We show sincerity, but you treat us like monkeys. Do you really think we are blind?" Sure enough, the negotiations between old enemies will definitely not go smoothly on this key issue. The Allies have made another mistake, trying to exchange Mirage tanks for Kirov airships. It was quite beautiful to think of. Of course the generals of the coalition forces disagreed, and many of the radical generals couldn't help but slap the table and roar. This time, not only the radicals, but also other generals were dissatisfied. General Li Wiki asked with a dark face, "General Bob, are you serious? Why are you so excited? Do you really look down on our allies' military technology and are not worthy of exchange with you?" General Bob pretended to be innocent and angry, and quietly changed his mind. PoortoRich suppressed his anger and retorted rudely, "General Bob, don't confuse the audience. It's better to take back this little trick. We are not looking down on the allies, but we also ask the allies to look at our coalition forces, otherwise we will not be able to possible alliance. This military technology exchange emphasizes the exchange of equal value. The Kirov airship is the most important weapon of our coalition. When we were discussing whether to exchange, many people within us refused to agree, but in the end we decided take it out in exchange. But what about the sincerity of your army? The Phantom tank can play some role in the battle, but compared with the Kirov airship, it is not on the same level." At this time, Wang Ling couldn't help but open his mouth to finish the attack. "General, on the decisive battlefield of the previous battle for hegemony, to put it bluntly, the development of the battle was biased in favor of the Allies. Before the advent of the Kirov airship, many times our coalition forces are in a passive position. However, since the Kirov airship was put into service and started fighting, the situation of the war was quickly reversed. Even if Yuri had not rebelled, the Allied forces would have failed by now. This one thing, I think you should know better than anyone else, right? It's another pot that is not mentioned. Although the coalition forces gave up the general attack due to internal problems before, everyone knows that if the attack really continues, not to mention what will happen to the coalition forces, in short, the Allies will definitely lose. This failure can be said to be a complete shame for the Allied forces. All the Allied generals present did not want to mention it, but Wang Ling brought it up. At that moment, many Allied generals became ashamed. However, Wang Ling didn't want to insult them over this matter. He changed the subject and said, "Of course, that is in the past. I didn't mean to take the opportunity to disgrace the Allies. I was just discussing the matter." The coalition turned defeat into victory. It can be said that large-scale weapons such as Kirov airships played a decisive role and truly had a powerful effect in turning the tide of the war. However, looking at your army's Phantom tank, although its effectiveness is surprising, it is still far from this. To the extent that even your army only uses it as an auxiliary unit, it rarely produces it, right? Using an auxiliary unit in exchange for a big killer weapon, this approach, to put it bluntly, is a white wolf with empty gloves. Snort. Wang Ling said the last few words almost word for word. After hearing this, many Allied generals snorted coldly and were a little unhappy, but they had nothing to say about Wang Ling's statement. But Wang Ling continued, "To be honest, we mentioned this approach during our discussions, but considering the sincerity of cooperation, we finally gave it up, so I hope your army can also put the overall situation first. Alone. A type of Phantom tank is indeed not enough to exchange for a Kirov airship. Of course, if you add a light tank, it should be possible. No. The Prism tank is the core technological unit of our Allied forces and must not be exchanged. Cannot exchange light tanks. Regarding Wang Ling's last proposal, a group of Allied generals roared as if they had been slapped on the butt, and almost immediately slapped the idea to death. Wang Ling spread his hands, "In the same way, I will also give it to everyone in the Allied forces. Kirov airships are also the core technological arms of our Allied forces. We have already planned to exchange them. We also ask the Allied forces to show sufficient sincerity. Otherwise this meeting cannot continue, and your army will never get any information from me." As he reached the end, Wang Ling's tone became more excited, and he even seemed to have completely forgotten the fact that his military rank was not popular at the scene. To put it bluntly, Wang Ling was probably just pretending when he did this. As for the proposal to exchange the Prism tanks, he was just deliberately being careless. Knowing that the Allies were unwilling to exchange, he took the initiative to move it out. In this arms technology exchange, he also has the Allied infantry technology that he likes. Since he is asked to negotiate, of course he must try his best to get it. At this moment, both the Allied and coalition forces seem to have forgotten his military rank, and no one at the scene could ignore his words. Cough. After the words fell, the scene was silent for a few seconds, and then General William took the initiative and sighed, "General Bob, please stop being so petty. Although you are very optimistic about the Phantom tank, the value of this type of tank unit is indeed incomparable. When boarding the Kirov airship, the two sides exchange, and naturally they have to show sincerity. Let's continue to select some more, add up the technologies of several types of arms, and jointly exchange for the air death." This peacemaker is quite shrewd. General Bob clearly intends to tease the coalition forces, and everyone with a discerning eye can see it. But when the words came to his mouth, they became something he kept to himself, which inadvertently left General Bob with a face, and at the same time left some room for relaxation in the negotiations between the two parties. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 495. It can be said that there is not a simple figure at this meeting. Almost all of them are generals of the first generation. Characters like Wang Ling and Agent Tanya all have basic military ranks. Of course, they immediately heard the implication of General William, and many people couldn't help but he stared at General William a few more times. Of course, it is one thing to hear it, but it is another thing to say it or not. For the important matter of the alliance between the two armies, no one has broken this layer of paper until now. General Bob was just trying to save face. Now that he finally had a peacemaker, he simply went down the slope and pretended to think, "That's right. Although the Phantom tank is also a high-level military technology of our allies, but compared with the Kirov aircraft, the god of air death, it is still inferior. So, tell me, what other military technologies should we bring out in exchange for the god of air death?" The meeting finally got back on track. The faces of the Allied generals finally looked better, and the Allied forces also quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Then one general proposed, "If the first type of Phantom tanks is not enough, then we will bring out the Dolphins and Godskin the Shield Cruiser. These two major naval units be exchanged for the Air Reaper together with the Phantom tank." Taking out the technology of the three types of arms and exchanging it for the coalition Kirov airship shows how valuable the Kirov airship is. However, the coalition did not buy these three types of arms. A coalition general who focused on developing the navy immediately rejected it. "No, these two types of naval arms have almost no effect on us. We have underwater attack power. Submarines and giant squids, as well as the Sea Scorpion for air defense, are no worse than these two types of naval units in terms of combat efficiency, so I ask your army to select some more capable units." During this negotiation, the Allied general who spoke also had some thoughts of shoddy goods, but the Allied forces were not fools, and they vetoed it without giving any face. As for the Allies, although they were a little dissatisfied with this tone, after all, they were in the wrong now, and no one specifically refuted it for a while. However, Wang Ling saw the opportunity and said playfully, "If these two can't do it, maybe the aircraft carrier can." "No, aircraft carriers cannot be exchanged." Sure enough, some Allied generals immediately vetoed it. Aircraft carriers, which are the core of the Allied navy, how could they exchange them with their stingy temper? Wang Ling was not surprised. He spread his hands and just stared at them without speaking. After the group of Allied generals were silent, another general suggested, "It seems that there is no possibility of exchange for the navy, then we will transfer to the army. Phantom tanks, multi-purpose infantry vehicles and SEALs, these three categories the military technology should be enough to exchange for your army's Kirov airship, Right. Oh. Regarding this proposal, the coalition generals who had been prepared to argue at any time were a little surprised for a while. This kind of proposal can be regarded as equal negotiation. Of course, accidents are accidents. These generals did not think that these three types of arms were valuable enough to be able to compete with Kirov airships, so no one said anything. However, Wang Ling raised his eyebrows, somewhat unexpected at this proposal. The Allies were really determined to make an exchange this time. Phantom tanks, multi-purpose infantry vehicles and SEALs, although these three types of arms are not considered heavyweight arms technology, but as the saying goes, the three stooges slay Zhuge Liang. The more they are, the more valuable they will be. The Phantom tank is not very powerful when attacking, but it is a defensive weapon. It is perfect for defending against Yuri's troops. The SEALs are now simplified Tanya agents. They can instantly kill infantry and blast buildings and ships at close range. They are very powerful. Of course, what surprised Wang Ling the most was the multifunctional infantry vehicle. Although this type of unit can be seen everywhere within the Allied forces, its versatility far exceeds its production value. Especially after the Allied forces have it, if crazy Ivan or terrorists are loaded into it, it can directly transform into a simplified version of the self-destruct truck. In Wang Ling's view, if the exchange was of equal value, the sum of these three types of arms would indeed be enough to exchange for a Kirov airship. However, he did not speak, because the unit he most hoped to obtain had not been mentioned yet, and he also hoped that the exchange could be changed. General, I have no objection to the other two types of arms, but multi-purpose infantry vehicles cannot be exchanged. These types of arms are of great significance and must not be integrated into other forces. While waiting, someone raised objections as expected. This person was not the Allied forces or the generals of the Allied forces, but Agent Tanya. Although he has a distinguished status and does not have much contact with the lower-level troops, Agent Tanya is still very familiar with the value and functions of these arms, and is fully aware of the dire consequences of exchanging multifunctional infantry vehicles. After being awakened by Agent Tanya, the general also understood. His face changed slightly, but he fell silent while thinking. To be honest, it can be said that Wang Ling had no hope of being able to exchange for a multi-purpose infantry vehicle, so he was not surprised by this situation. He glanced at Agent Tanya and then smiled and said, "Generals, if we exclude many as for functional infantry vehicles, there are only two types of units: Phantom tanks and SEALs. Although these two types of units are good, the exchange of Kirov airships is still a bit unsatisfactory." At this stage of the negotiation, the Allied generals have realized that the coalition is difficult to deal with, and they cannot afford to fight with nothing. However, they are not dissatisfied with Wang Ling's statement. Wang Ling glanced at these generals and saw that they couldn't make up their minds for a while. He took the initiative and raised the topic. "Well, generals, since it is so difficult to choose, I will simply choose the Phantom tank. A few things. Phantom tanks, Navy SEALs, Chrono Legionnaires, rocket troopers. Finally, I caught the opportunity and claimed the three major categories of infantry arms from the Allies in one fell swoop." Leaving aside the SEALs, Wang Ling had been talking about being a member of the Chrono Corps for too long. If the rocket pilots were in the real world, you can imagine how comfortable they would be. Wang Ling, you have passed this time. Do you think we are stupid? Of course, the process will not go smoothly. General Bob said with a dark face, "Although the value of your airborne death god is great, but the combined value of the technologies of these four types of arms is more than that of a single type of air death. This exchange is not equal." However, Wang Ling had already planned it. "It's not equal, we can add more. The Kirov airship of the god of death in the air, plus the terrorist robot. During the previous defensive operations, the generals should have fully seen the power of the terrorist robot. The effectiveness can definitely play a subversive role when fighting against Yuri's troops. Use these 2 types of arms in exchange for the 4 types of arms of your army. This exchange should be equivalent, right? His proposal, not to mention it was a surprise to the Allies. Even the generals of the Allied forces looked at him with some suspicion. They had agreed in advance that only Kirov airships would be exchanged. However, a colonel made a selfish decision in front of a group of generals. How could he be so brave? Big. Of course, accidents were accidents, but these generals also believed in Wang Ling's judgment, and no one raised any objections. As for the Allies, they seemed to be very interested in this proposal. A group of people whispered for a while before General Bob finally made the final decision. Okay, this is the exchange. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 496. Following General Bob's statement, the technological exchange of arms that Wang Ling had so painstakingly proposed and guided was finally officially declared a success. After hearing the statement, Wang Ling remained calm on the surface, but in fact he breathed a sigh of relief and was also slightly excited. Regarding the conversion of arms in the different dimensional system, the arms he can convert in the coalition have already reached the top level and cannot be further improved. But now, when he was dozing off and met his pillow, he exchanged 3 major Allied armies in one breath, 2 of which Wang Ling was particularly optimistic about. How could he not be excited? Although, in order to exchange for these 4 types of arms, Wang Ling took the initiative and used the technology of terror robots, but the generals of the coalition forces at the scene did not blame him. Instead, they all showed some smiles. In the eyes of this group of people, the value of the terror robot's military technology is far inferior to that of the Kirov airship. They can exchange these 2 types of arms for the 4 Allied arms and solve the biggest obstacle to the alliance between the 2 armies. This move is itself a kind of achievement. Pa! Pa pa pa! Bang bang bang! After General Bob expressed his stance, the Allies naturally breathed a sigh of relief. General William took the lead and applauded slowly. The applause was very abrupt in the conference room, but it was also very contagious. Soon almost everyone in the conference room applauded. The success of the arms technology exchange negotiation means that the joint meeting between the 2 parties has truly made substantial progress. As 2 major forces that were originally incompatible, it is not easy to take this step. Amid the applause, the 2 commanders, PoortoRich and General Bob, also represented their respective forces, stood up and shook hands with each other, symbolizing the formal reaching of this consensus. As for the various subsequent detailed operations and exchanges, they don't need to worry about it. There will naturally be dedicated personnel to handle it. They only need to agree and sign. Bang bang bang! Bang bang bang! The applause was still thunderous and lasted for a long time before gradually falling down. At this time, General William suddenly stood up, with a faint smile on his face, and said, "First of all, congratulations to the Allied and coalition forces for taking this important step of alliance. However, the order of exchange of these types of arms is, wouldn't we also discuss it by the way?" Order. The sudden mention of this word made all the generals at the scene confused for a moment. What do you mean? General William explained in a confident tone, our alliance is to jointly fight against the Empire of Mind. This is a war, destined to be protracted. As the original hostile forces, we will inevitably have some frictions and bumps during this period. So as the cornerstone of the alliance, the military technology cannot be exchanged all at once, otherwise the 2 sides will be out of bounds over time, which is not a good strategy. Therefore, these military technologies should be divided into 2 batches and exchanged with each other. Generals, does what you say make sense? Yeah. That's true. That makes sense. Can we exchange it in 2 batches? That's appropriate, I think it will work. Almost all the generals at the scene agreed to this proposal, except Wang Ling, who looked very unnatural. This has obviously been negotiated, but in the end, this is a trick. As a representative of the coalition forces, this is indeed a good proposal for the sake of the unity of the two armies. However, from the perspective of a player, Wang Ling found this proposal to be unreasonable. With good military technology in front of him, why should he postpone the exchange? Of course, at this time, the overall situation is still the most important thing. Anyway, if the two armies are united, this military technology will be exchanged sooner or later. Okay. If that's the case, then our allies will first exchange the Phantom tank and SEAL team for the coalition's aerial death Kirov aircraft. How about it? After getting everyone's consent, General William took the initiative and wanted to decide the order of the exchange. However, this guy messed up Wang Ling's situation. Wang Ling would not follow his wishes and immediately denied, "That's not appropriate. The first thing the coalition forces want to exchange is the terrorist robot." PoortoRich was about to agree, but Wang Ling's sudden interruption made him think twice and fell silent, wanting to hear what this legendary colonel thought. General William was somewhat caught off guard by this denial. He glared at Wang Ling and asked, "Wang Ling, have you had enough trouble? Although this exchange is said to be of equal value, in fact, our allies are exchanging 4 types of arms for you. Between the two categories, we will suffer some losses, right? First of all, exchanging the death in the air is also to seek a balance of interests, so why is it inappropriate?" Wang Ling also turned on the quibble mode. "General, this is wrong. The value of the military technology is indeed equal, otherwise I don't believe you will agree to the exchange. But when it comes to suffering a loss, I don't believe it is the allies who suffer a loss. What the coalition forces exchanged are mechanical airship units, which can be produced at any time as long as they have the technology and control methods. However, even if your army's infantry unit has weapons, equipment, technology, and training methods, the training will take time. It is not as convenient as making a mechanical airship, so we still suffer a loss. The technology of this Kirov airship should be reserved for the next exchange, which is the real balance of interests." Now Wang Ling didn't care whether what he said made sense or not, he just said whatever came to his mind. However, his words also made it difficult for the allies to argue. What Wang Ling said really made some sense. Seeing that these generals were unmoved, Wang Ling continued to add more information. "In addition, generals, the allies really need terrorist robots more than the aerial death god. Although the Kirov airship is powerful, it also requires tricky command. And the shortcomings in speed are not very conducive to attacking Yuri's base. After all, Yuri rebelled from us, and is well aware of the threat of Kirov airships, and has strong air defense capabilities. Kirov airships will be short-term. It's impossible to perform meritorious deeds inside, so it's better to exchange for a more flexible and terrifying robot. Generals, do you think this is true?" Wang Ling returned the same question to the allied generals intact. In a word, in this first round of exchange, there was no way he could get his hands on the Kirov airship. After his long speech, the group of allied generals glanced at each other, and after thinking for a while, they actually felt that what Wang Ling said was reasonable, and did not continue to refute. The order of exchange of arms between the two sides was decided. This last hurdle was successfully overcome, and then the next step was entered. General Bob then asked, "Now, the two armies have joined forces and have taken the most important step. Next, of course, there will be more discuss the development and overall operational outline after the alliance, but before discussing these, I want to know more about Yuri's troops. Wang Ling, is it time to make the information you mentioned before public? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 497. Although General Bob's tone still contained a somewhat commanding tone, the smell of gunpowder was much lighter than before the arms technology exchange was negotiated. This request was quite normal. Upon hearing this question, almost everyone in the conference room looked at Wang Ling. Although Wang Ling only has the rank of senior colonel now, no one dares to peek at this guy. As a senior colonel, he fought against the Allied generals and vigorously promoted the alliance between the two armies. How could this be an ordinary senior colonel? Of course, what everyone cares about most now is the information from his mouth. Okay, it's indeed time to disclose the information. Wang Ling had already prepared and did not object. After standing up, he input the electronic projection data prepared in advance into the projection monitor. Then, like a lecturer, he took out the control light pen and walked to the innermost side of the conference room, next to the projection display. To be honest, under the gaze of this group of generals, Wang Ling was inevitably a little nervous, but after several hard confrontations and suggestions before, he was more or less accustomed to this kind of atmosphere, and did not show those nervousness. He took a deep breath. After suppressing his tone, he said, "Next, I will make a comprehensive summary of all the military technology and even the construction technology of the Seoul Empire. Yuri's troops are difficult to deal with, but with my information, we can make corresponding arrangements to the principle of mutual restraint between arms is much simpler when facing the enemy. Therefore, generals, don't care too much about face. Those who should take notes should take good notes. As a matter of time, I will only talk about it once." A colonel said this to a group of generals, which surprised many people present. However, after glancing at each other, except for some of the thorny generals who disagreed with these words, the others were all ready to record it. After Wang Ling read it, he no longer asked for anything more, and the information explanation began immediately. He first clicked the light pen, and an electronic pattern of Yuri's new recruits immediately appeared on the screen, accompanied by an animation of Yuri's new recruits attacking. Please see, this type of unit is the main infantry of Yuri's army. Yuri new recruits. Everyone is equipped with a psychic helmet, which amplifies psychic power and launches it through the helmet to form a powerful physical attack. The overall combat effectiveness is stronger than that of a single Allied soldier. After being upgraded to the elite level, a single soldier's the threat is not even worse than the Grizzly tank. However, that's all. Apart from this, these soldiers have no other special abilities. They have powerful firepower, or units with strong lethality against infantry, or the Air Force. Just deal with it. Everyone at the scene had directly or indirectly seen this type of military unit and had some understanding of it. Many people nodded, while some didn't take it seriously. Only a few generals buried their heads and didn't know what was being recorded. Then, Wang Ling continued to click the light pen, and the electronic pattern and animation of the wild beast appeared on the screen. This is the wild orc, a monster soldier created by Yuri's army scientists through genetic mutation technology. The wild orc has a very strong attack on a single target. It can blast soldiers and even tanks with its physical fists. It can even dismantle walls and destroy them. Exploding buildings. After the elite level, it is even more dangerous, and it can even pose a fatal threat to novice apocalypse tanks. However, this type of troops cannot use other weapons and can only fight with fists. Although the attack power is powerful, their short hands are also if you don't break away from the infantry fan tao, just focus on destroying it before it gets close, or use units or air forces that are powerful against infantry to deal with it. Wild orcs? This is the first time I heard the name of this thing, some generals thought thoughtfully after hearing this. Wang Ling did not pause too much and continued to click the light pen, and the pattern of the psychic army appeared on the screen. I think you should be more aware of this type of soldiers. Psychic troops are also called Yuri clones. The attack method is to control our infantry or armored units, causing them to rebel instantly, and can release shockwaves, indiscriminate shockwaves. Explode all infantry within the range. Of course, the psychic troops are not omnipotent. Some mindless units, or personnel with strong psychic powers, cannot be controlled, and can only control one unit at a time. After control, the psychic troops will be killed. The controlled arms will also return to normal. As for the killing method, it is recommended to use arms with a longer range, or defensive buildings, uncontrollable arms, air force, or to win with numbers, when they cannot control the second unit of our army. It's time to kill them. The killing suggestions of this type of troops attracted the attention of many generals at the scene and recorded them one after another. Wang Ling was left alone for some time, and then the virus sniper continued to appear on the screen. This is a virus sniper. Compared with allied snipers, the range is shorter, but the damage caused by the virus is more annoying and frightening. The troops shot by the virus sniper will explode into a cloud of virus smoke, which will be blown away by the wind. After floating for a long time, the soldiers poisoned by the virus smoke will also burst into virus smoke, and the cycle starts. However, like the sniper, the virus sniper has almost no damage to armored units, and can be easily killed by tanks. When the Yuri infantry team is dispatched, it is recommended to eliminate these types of units in advance. It is best to use the air force to kill them, followed by armored units. Due to sufficient preparation, Wang Ling was very fast when explaining. In this short period of time, he had explained 4 types of Yuri infantry units one after another. Many generals were memorizing and digesting these explanations quickly, but some generals didn't take it seriously, and even started to sarcastically say, "Wang Ling, is it too much to disclose the information you mentioned? We already know the news through previous battles." "Really? What about this?" Wang Ling smiled and flicked the light pen, and a special type of Yuri soldiers appeared on the screen. This type of soldier is a member of the psychic army, standing on a suspension machine hand-painted by Wang Ling. Seeing this, some generals were confused, but the general who had questioned before said again, "Isn't this just a new means of transportation for the psychic troops?" Wang Ling shook his head, and his expression gradually became serious. "No, if this is really the case, then that's fine. This type of unit is called Yuri X, and it is a heroic unit of Yuri's army." Except for Wang Ling, this was the first time for everyone at the scene to come into contact with this type of military unit. Everyone became curious. Even Agent Tanya raised her eyebrows and stared at the screen intently. Seeing that the desired effect was achieved, Wang Ling did not show off any further and immediately introduced, "Yuri, you can even control our army's buildings." What? This news was earth-shattering. When the generals heard it, they all showed shocked expressions. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 498. Control the building. Are you mistaken? There can be such a perverted army, Agent Tanya couldn't help but ask. The other generals' faces were also uncertain. PoortoRich couldn't even hold back the question. "Wang Ling, are you sure? Please tell me more about this ability to control buildings. What exactly is going on?" Wang Ling nodded slightly and explained, "I'm pretty sure that Yuri, they are the most important defensive buildings, but without special means, Yuri X can completely defeat these buildings. The control distance of Yuri activate the mind control ability to instantly control these 2 types of buildings, and let the light prism rays or electromagnetic currents shoot at our own troops, just like the situation when other military units are controlled." This information was not good news for the generals at the scene. The generals felt heavy in their hearts after hearing it. However, Wang Ling continued to add fuel to the fire. "Of course, the buildings that Yuri, such as power plants or refineries, tank engineering, radars, spy satellites, combat laboratories, airfields, maintenance factories, and even command posts, are all among its control options. His. If the previous explanation only made these generals feel heavy in their hearts, then the current explanation really made these generals feel terrified. With so many buildings, Yuri X can control them all. Even the command post is no exception, so what's the point? Isn't this too scary? All buildings are controlled and can be used by him. General Bob took a few deep breaths, tried his best to stay calm, and asked with a straight face. Wang Ling nodded firmly, "Yes, General. Once the defensive buildings are controlled, they will immediately fire on our own troops, and if other buildings are controlled, they will also have corresponding functions. For example, if the tank factory is controlled, during this period, Yuri's troops will also obtain the technology of the main battle tank based on the corresponding base. The airport will be controlled, and the fighter jets originally parked on it will also be used by them. The command post will be controlled, and we can build and unlock our base in sequence. Almost all technologies. By now, these generals are already speechless. But Wang Ling seemed to be endlessly talking. In a war, 1 or 2 soldier units are far from able to determine the outcome and dominate the battlefield, but if the situation is right, Yuri X has this ability. At the base, when the defense is insufficient, every time he controls a building, he can immediately send out engineers to dismantle it, and then control another building. In this cycle, a complete base can be destroyed by it, and may even be destroyed. Hearing this, the faces of a group of generals became increasingly ugly. The threat from Yuri's troops was more terrifying than they imagined. After explaining the terror of Yuri, it is omnipotent. In addition to being able to float on the sea, and armored units cannot be rolled over, at other times outside the base, it is just like ordinary psychic troops. The killing method is also the same. As long as it is not put into the base, Yuri X cannot be too presumptuous. Moreover, although the control range of Yuri, the expanded range is enough to cover Yuri X, so don't worry too much. Call. When the generals heard this, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as Yuri X had some restrictions and could handle it, that would be easy. Of course, these generals could not ignore the threats mentioned earlier. At that moment, all the generals immersed themselves in taking notes. That's right, all the generals, even the generals who had previously been disdainful, have put away their contemptuous attitude. With this simple explanation, it can be said that Wang Ling's information really made these generals take it seriously. After all the generals had finished recording, Wang Ling continued his explanation. After the infantryman finished speaking, he came to the armored arms. With a click of the pen, the pattern and animation of the tornado tank appeared on the screen. The tornado tank is the main battle tank of Yuri's army. There is nothing unusual about it. Its combat effectiveness is similar to that of the Allied Grizzly tank. You can deal with it how you want. Compared to the previous ones, this explanation can be said to be the simplest. Then, another image of a Getter tank popped up on the screen. This is a Getter tank, the main anti-aircraft unit of Yuri's army. There are 2 large-caliber Gatling machine guns mounted on the body, and the shooting is divided into 3 levels of firepower. First of all, it is a low-speed shooting, with limited firepower. After firing continuously for a period of time, the rate of fire suddenly accelerates to the second level, and the threat increases. After a period of shooting, the rate of fire speeds up again, to the third level, and the firepower is full. Open, the attack power at that time is also the strongest. However, the restrictions are not small. If you open fire again after the ceasefire, you have to slowly increase the gear from the beginning. In addition, the armor and health of this type of unit are not too strong, but against infantry the lethality is considerable, so it is recommended to use armored troops to kill it. The generals nodded to record, and the screen pattern continued to change after a while. This is a neural assault vehicle. It can place poisonous poison near our troops. Troops within this range will see hallucinations and attack all targets they can see. Although it is disgusting, in my opinion, this type of the role of the troop types is actually not that great. It mainly serves as a harassment function. Its neurotoxin can only affect the troops with minds, and its range is very limited. Before it gets close, just concentrate fire to eliminate it. It is easy to intercept. It's this kind of vehicle. When he said this, an Allied general recognized it. Although this neural assault vehicle has appeared less often, the Allies have indeed suffered losses in this regard, and the impression is still quite deep. After the recording is completed, the screen pattern rotates again. This type of unit is called a mind control vehicle. It has no other attack capabilities, but it can control our army's units just like the psychic troops. It can control more than one unit. The control speed is very fast, but the armor and life are extremely high. It is extremely threatening. However, this type of military unit also has a fatal flaw. It can activate the center of mind control, which is the brain placed in the center of the vehicle. But this brain also contains human desires and greed. I don't know. Satisfied. Its load limit is to control 3 units of our military units. However, under the influence of greed, the mind control vehicle will often control too many units of our military units regardless of the consequences. Once there are more than 3 units, the vehicle will be overloaded. Life will be lost, and the greater the number of controls, the more serious the loss of life will be. When the number of controls reaches 10, the severe load will almost kill the mind control vehicle instantly. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 499. Mind Control Vehicles. This type of unit has appeared on the battlefield more than once or twice, but its unique and tricky way of fighting the enemy has always caused headaches and confusion for the coalition and allied forces. They don't know what this type of unit is. But now, after listening to Wang Ling's detailed introduction, they all suddenly understood that almost all the generals were immersed in recording, while Agent Tanya stared at Wang Ling and asked, "So, when you were on guard, you were specifically targeting the characteristics of this type of military unit, arranging a life-threatening charge for more than 40 people. This is simply to actively increase the load on the mind control vehicle, and in the end it will be overburdened." Correct answer. Indeed, if you force a defense and use the wrong troops to fight against a mind-controlled vehicle, you will easily suffer big losses, just like the previous Allied defense line. Wang Ling nodded and explained. This sentence also points out the difference between whether there is intelligence or not. The coalition forces destroyed several mind control vehicles with almost zero losses, but the Allies suffered heavy losses. Although it was true, Agent Tanya was still very unconvinced and looked angry after hearing this. Wang Ling ignored her mood and continued to explain, "Of course, in addition to using infantry to force the explosion, there are also some ways to deal with individual mind-controlled vehicles. Those uncontrolled units can restrain the mind-controlled vehicles, such as the terrifying robots I have demonstrated before. In addition, the Air Force can also completely destroy mind-controlled vehicles, and the Allied Phantom tanks." Wait a minute. The Phantom tank is also a sentient unit, so how can it restrain the mind control vehicle? Agent Tanya found a loophole and pointed it out unceremoniously. Wang Ling smiled and said, "It's very simple. If you are not discovered and have no target, of course there is no way to control it. When the Phantom tank is stationary, it will disguise itself as a tree. Unless it is exposed or specifically detected, otherwise, the enemy will not know it. However, this Phantom tank is also very lethal to infantry and armored units, so you can hide aside and sneak attack the mind control vehicle." That's what happened. Agent Tanya finally understood, but after thinking about it, she couldn't help but glared at Wang Ling. "Hey, What kind of freak are you? Why are our allied forces so different? But you know everything about everything, even better than us. Wang Ling spread his hands, but didn't answer at all. Agent Tanya was like punching cotton. She was so angry that she gritted her teeth, but there was nothing she could do about him. As for the other generals, they had just recorded the characteristics of the mind control vehicle before, and now that they heard the detailed restraint methods, they quickly lowered their heads and started recording again. Some Allied generals even lamented while recording that the Allies almost lost the previous battle for hegemony. No injustice. Just look at Wang Ling's perverted intelligence. I'm afraid all their arms have been found. A method of restraint. Wang Ling watched this situation over and over again, and couldn't help but feel a little funny in his heart. In reality, he could only be below and listen to the words of the lecturer above, but in the world of Red Alert, he suddenly became a lecturer, and his audience was a group of senior generals, and they had to pay attention to his intelligence and focus on it. Record. In the final analysis, he still took advantage of the players, as if he had turned on a cheat here. However, Wang Ling has no psychological burden at all about this. It can make this war easier, so what if he cheats? Who makes him a player? After the information was recorded, Wang Ling clicked the light pen, and the screen immediately changed into the pattern of a magneto-electric tank. Pointing at the pattern, Wang Ling explained, this kind of tank is called a magneto-electric tank, which uses strong magnets to attack and control. The range of this type of tank is not inferior to that of the prism tank, and it can absorb buildings from very long distances. It makes the building continue to lose health. Its effect is similar to that of the prism tank. However, the most disgusting thing about the magneto tank is the way it attacks armored units. It can control a tank from a long distance. If you force the vehicle into the air, calculate the distance and landing point accurately, you can force the tank to hit an obstacle or fall on another tank, causing the tank to be scrapped. After hearing these explanations, many generals on the scene nodded slightly. They had seen the effectiveness of this type of tank in previous wars. Agent Tanya interrupted and asked, I learned this from you in advance. The restrained unit is infantry, right? Wang Ling snapped his fingers, that's right. Magneto-electric tanks have no way to defeat infantry. Infantry can defeat a single type of magneto-electric tank. In addition, because one magneto-electric tank can only control one tank vehicles, so a larger number of tanks can be used to forcefully suppress it. After the explanation, the generals started recording again, and after Wang Ling waited for a moment, the pattern of a flying saucer appeared on the screen again. This is a laser UFO. It is the ace unit of Yuri's army. It is almost invincible in attacking cities and territories. It is extremely disgusting. Its attack method is laser light, which can attack ground and air targets. When the number is large enough, few units can stop them. Even Kirov airships can't withstand the shooting of large-scale laser UFOs. Of course, the most disgusting part is their adsorption function to buildings. In previous battles, all generals must have seen this type of troops adsorbed to defensive buildings. The building will immediately fail. If it is attached to the ore refinery, it can forcibly plunder the base's funds. The most terrifying thing is to be attached to the power plant, which can forcibly cut off the power of the entire base and paralyze the base. There are not enough air defense units to stop it. Laser the scum can literally run amok in the base. Wang Ling was deeply impressed by this kind of flying saucer. When he played against Yuri in the game, he often suffered big losses in this aspect, so that he later focused on air defense and specifically dealt with these laser UFOs. Of course, Wang Ling was not the only one who was deeply impressed. Other generals were also convinced. Judging from the situation of the base that had been wiped out before, this laser UFO was really not an ordinary threat to them. So, what's the method of restraint? A general asked immediately. But Wang Ling was also a bit embarrassed by this issue, To be honest, no type of military force can completely defeat this kind of flying saucer. Just like before, I deployed more than 20 anti-aircraft crawlers to block more than a dozen laser UFOs. 7 of them were destroyed by its counterattack. To deal with the laser UFO, they could only forcefully bombard it with air defense troops. Therefore, when fighting against the Empire of the Mind, all major bases had to increase their air defense forces. Before they entered the base, shoot them all down. Among these air defense forces, of course the anti-aircraft tracked vehicles and anti-aircraft guns are more efficient. The Allied anti-aircraft missiles are powerful, but the rate of fire is a bit slow. When defending, it is recommended to use more air defense missiles outside the base. Do the deployment. Can we only attack by force? Some generals were obviously not satisfied with this conclusion, but they had no choice. Regardless of whether Wang Ling said that, they still had to keep records. After the recording was completed, Wang Ling did not rush to continue changing the introduced arms. Instead, he took a break and explained, through the introduction of these arms, the generals should be able to find that Yuri's army is a separate arm. The attack is actually not too scary. If you know this information in advance, you can deal with it very efficiently. But what I want to say is that when Yuri's troops attack, it is still relatively rare for a single unit to be dispatched like before. What is more common, and the most difficult to guard against, is joint combat with multiple arms. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 500. Multiple Arms Joint Operations. At the mention of this word, some generals on the scene glanced at each other, and some generals questioned, "Don't we often do this when we attack each other? Why is it so difficult to guard against Yuri's troops?" Wang Ling shook his head slightly, sighed slightly, and explained, "No matter how many arms our coalition and allied armies have, they are all for offense, using several different offensive methods to enhance firepower output. But the armored arms of Yuri's army have functions. But it's really difficult, much more difficult than our joint operations with multiple arms." After a pause, Wang Ling thought for a while and then said, "For example, the magneto-electric tanks cooperate with the air defense units. The armored units controlled by the magneto-electric tanks will float high and cannot fire on their own, but the air defense units can fire at will. As long as the firepower is strong enough, you can blow up the controlled armored units in the air. In addition, the cooperation between the magneto-electric tanks and the mind-controlled vehicles is even better. For example, our Army's Apocalypse tanks, or the Allied forces' the Light Prism tank was attracted from a distance, and was pulled in the air to the vicinity of the magneto-electric tank. After landing, neither the Apocalypse tank nor the Light Prism tank had time to fight back, and was controlled by the mind control vehicle. They rebelled on the spot. Or maybe the Spirit, the control vehicle, cooperates with other attack-type units, complementing each other and drawing on each other's strengths, and it is also difficult to deal with. Just like when he talked about laser UFO before, Wang Ling focused on these things. In fact, he had suffered a big loss in the game, and now he was taking precautions in advance. The generals on the scene, after learning about the characteristics of Yuri's troops, quickly realized the threat after Wang Ling woke up. PoortoRich held his chin up, nodded slightly and said, "To put it this way, it is indeed tricky. However, when Yuri's troops attacked our base before, they also fought together with multiple arms. Although they have strong combat effectiveness and tricky fighting methods, the cooperation between them does not seem to be as tight as imagined. Coach, just as the combat effectiveness of different soldiers in our same unit is different, the combat effectiveness and command coordination capabilities of each Yuri unit are also different. Not all Yuri units can cooperate so closely. Moreover, Many Yuri units have different combat effectiveness and command coordination capabilities. The coordination of the military units also requires some adjustment. Many Yuri troops may be at this stage, and as their cooperation becomes closer and closer, the war will become more difficult to fight as it goes on, Wang Ling replied. Although the situation of Yuri's troops is just a guess, it is indeed possible. After hearing this, PoortoRich couldn't help but feel a little heavier. General Bob asked directly, so, how to deal with the joint attack of these types of Yuri arms? Wang Ling glanced at him and shook his head with a wry smile. General, this problem is a bit difficult for me. It is really difficult to solve. The closer the opponent cooperates, the more difficult it is to deal with. Of course, if you insist on analyzing it, it is not impossible. Perhaps, among these arms, the biggest threat is the mind control vehicle. Take the lead in killing the mind control vehicle regardless of the cost, and other armored arms can attack as usual. Of course, your army's giant artillery can restrain some combined arms to a certain extent. In addition, you can also deploy more phantom tanks, which can often work wonders when defending against attacks from multiple arms. Is it even difficult for you to say that? General Bob was a little surprised. From these days of contact, he clearly understood that Wang Ling's confidence was even a bit arrogant in his opinion, but it was no worse than Agent Tanya. Such an arrogant person admitted that he was stumped. You can imagine how difficult it would be for Yuri to combine arms to attack. After being surprised, many generals at the scene quickly recorded these defense suggestions. Although Wang Ling didn't guarantee that he could defend himself, having this information and strategies was better than nothing. In the record, suddenly another radical coalition general stared at Wang Ling and asked slightly dissatisfied, Wang Ling, have you known about these arms of Yuri's army for a long time? That's right, General, Wang Ling didn't deny it either. When the general heard this, he seemed a little annoyed. I have to admit that your information is indeed very useful. But why didn't it be made public earlier? During these days, many of our bases have been occupied by Yuri troops. If you know this information in advance, you may be able to avoid these tragedies. That seems to be the case. Indeed, it should have been made public earlier. When he said this, the other radicals in the coalition couldn't help but murmur, and they were dissatisfied with Wang Ling. However, Wang Ling had already thought of the wording and was not flustered. He replied with a wry smile, General, I didn't mean to hide it. I also have my own considerations. Let me ask you in turn, if I had known this information in advance, what would I have done if I had known this information in advance? The army has taken the upper hand in defense, so is there even the slightest possibility of joining forces with the Allies? According to my judgment, the coalition forces have been at war with the Allied forces for so long. If they were not forced to a certain extent, it would be impossible to agree to the alliance. Revealing this information in advance will definitely cut off all possibilities of alliance. Look at the previous disputes between the two sides. You will know how intense it is. So far, the combat effectiveness revealed by Yuri's troops is only part of it. The power of the Seoul Empire is far beyond our imagination. The coalition and allied forces are on their own. It can be said that it is difficult to fight against the Seoul Empire and will only be defeated. Defeated one after another, the consequences at that time will definitely be 100 times more serious than now. Therefore, after comprehensive consideration, I still chose to conceal it. Please understand, General. Wang Ling was afraid that the general would raise any other objections, so he interrupted him temporarily. At the end, the questioning coalition general finally got stuck and stared at Wang Ling for a long time before finally snorting, okay, what you said makes sense. But now that the two armies have joined forces, in the future all intelligence can no longer be concealed, otherwise military law will be dealt with. Yes, General. This level was finally passed. Wang Ling didn't care how serious what he said was. After heaving a sigh of relief, he continued to click the light pen. Another hand-drawn strange submarine appeared on the screen. The overall shape was streamlined. Look. It looks a bit like a big shark. Continue the explanation. Generals, please take a look. This kind of submarine is called the Thunder submarine. It is the only naval combat unit of Yuri's force besides the air cushion troop carrier. In naval battles, it is a great threat. Just like the coalition submarine and the dreadnought, like a combination of class warships, the submarine can launch 2 consecutive torpedoes in front of it, and can also surface and launch sea and land missiles. It has a very strong combat effectiveness and is quite tricky. The way to deal with it is to use 2 or 3 times the number of offensive naval forces to suppress with firepower and attack with force. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 501. In the Great Spiritual Empire, does the Navy have only one type of service? After listening to Wang Ling's explanation, some generals at the scene couldn't help but be a little surprised. But there are also generals who realized the threat of the Thunder submarine from the explanation. Can it fire 2 torpedoes in a row? Isn't the comprehensive firepower twice as powerful as the coalition submarines? Yes, General, although Yuri's navy has fewer types, it contains the functions of 2 types of arms and has strong firepower. That's why it is recommended that when dealing with the Thunder submarine, it needs to use a navy several times its size to suppress it with powerful firepower. As for the sea and land missiles, although they are slow when launched, the missiles fly very fast, so the air defense forces on the seaside cannot be left behind, Wang Ling added. After listening to his suggestions, many generals nodded and started recording. After the recording was completed, Wang Ling was not in a hurry to continue changing patterns. Instead, he waved the light pen and asked, "Generals, the introduction to the armies of the Seoul Empire has come to an end here. Is this information still useful?" "Nonsense. If it was useless, I would record so much myself." "You brat, are you allowed to say so many useless words? Just like a corner, we old guys have to listen to you. Although you are a little unhappy, this information is really useful. Are these the only types of troops in Yuri's army?" The Allied generals laughed and cursed. Even the Allied generals, no matter how displeased Wang Ling had been, had to admit the value of this information. After hearing this, Wang Ling nodded slightly with satisfaction. If these generals find it useful, it is not in vain for him to compile this information. After all the words fell, Wang Ling clapped his hands again. These are indeed the arms of Yuri's army. However, if you only know the information about the arms, they can only be used for defense. But if the war is only for defense, it is impossible to win. Yes, so I also summarized the defensive buildings and main buildings of Yuri's troops in the Seoul Empire. "Oh? We have never seen these, how do you know?" a general wondered. But it was impossible for Wang Ling to answer this question. He smiled and said nothing, flicked the pen, and 2 hand-drawn pictures appeared on the screen. One of them looked like an iron plate laid flat on the ground. There was nothing strange about it. In another picture, a tank was parked on an iron plate, and the iron plate stretched upwards to form 4 walls, surrounding the tank. Wang Ling has never studied painting, but he can still draw some pictures based on gourds and gourds. No matter how similar they are, he can still get a general idea. This kind of thing is called a tank bunker. The tank bunker itself does not have any offensive power, but it can protect the tank, allowing the tank to hide inside and do its best damage. And if we want to blow up the tank hiding inside, we can only take the lead in carrying the firepower, blow up the tank bunker, and then deal with the tanks hidden inside. Of course, the Air Force can directly attack the tanks inside. To deal with this kind of thing, in addition to the fire suppression of conventional troops, you can also use light prism tanks, this type of long-range attack unit. Tank bunker? The Mind Empire's idea is quite good. They actually put all the tanks into the bunker. After hearing Wang Ling talk about tank bunkers, a group of generals couldn't help but feel a little funny. However, no one looked down upon this thing, and many people started to record it. Then, the screen turned and another hand drawing appeared on the screen. In the picture, it is a cannon-shaped building, with two super large caliber Gatling cannons particularly obvious. This kind of defensive building is called the Getter cannon. In fact, to put it bluntly, it is the architectural version of the Getter tank. The attack method is exactly the same as the Getter tank, but it cannot move and needs to consume electricity, but it is more resistant to beatings than the Getter tank. To deal with this thing, air strikes are not recommended because the losses will be huge. You can use fire suppression by ground forces or long-range attack units such as light tanks. This kind of building, because the Getter tank had been introduced before, the generals on the scene were not very interested. However, what Wang Ling introduced later had to attract the attention of the generals. This kind of building is also a hand-drawn drawing by Wang Ling. It looks like a tower. The upper part is divided into several tubes that are juxtaposed and seem to be able to rotate. Generals must pay attention to this kind of defensive building. This is the most proud defensive building of Yuri's army, the Mind Control Tower. This building needs to be driven by electricity and has no attack capabilities, but like the Mind Army, it can control our troops. And a Mind Control Tower can control 3 units in a row. It will not be greedy like a mind control vehicle and control it too much, making it unable to bear the load and bursting. Mind Control Tower. Holy crap, it's mind control again. I really see that this is Yuri's specialty. Why are there so many of his troops who have mind control abilities? Can you control our troops? Or 3 in a row? This mind control tower is a bit tricky, no worse than the threat of a mind control car. The strategic vision of these generals was also very ruthless. After Wang Ling explained the basic information, he immediately realized the difficulty of this type of building. Wang Ling also nodded and explained, yes, compared to those tricky attacks, the most troublesome part of the Seoul Empire is actually the defense strength of their base. Usually, Yuri's base will build a large number of defensive buildings, whether ground or air defense, are very tight. Of course, the most disgusting one is the mind control tower in the picture. As the most proud defensive building of the Yuri army, every Yuri base will build a large-scale mind control tower. If ordinary troops go to attack, they are simply transporting troops to Yuri's troops. After listening to these explanations, the generals on the scene fell silent. From these explanations, it can be seen that the strength of the Seoul Empire is more powerful than they imagined. Before it was their turn to attack, just seeing the explanation of these defensive forces already made these generals feel heavy pressure. Wang Ling was silent for a moment, without waiting for any reply from the generals, and simply spoke by himself. When it comes to dealing with mind control towers, the most effective ones are long-range units such as the Prism tank. If you use other controllable units to attack, then you have to be prepared to sacrifice and attack forcefully. Although the mind control tower is said to be able to control 3 target units, there is a short interval between these 3 consecutive controls. In addition, the Air Force attack will not be controlled. But the anti-aircraft firepower of Yuri base is too fierce, so if you use the Air Force, you must also be prepared to sacrifice.